She got in the wrong car on Christmas Eve, and the man who locked the doors said, "You're not leaving." Before we begin the story, don't forget to follow Tender Bonds, like and share our story. The night Cass Duval climbed into Silas Rook's car, she had mistaken it for her brother's Cutlass. Same oxidized burgundy, same cracked left tail light, same particular exhaustion a car acquires after enough Ohio winters. Silas didn't correct her right away. He sat with his hands on the wheel and the engine running and watched her wrestle a paper grocery bag onto her lap in the dark of the major parking lot, and the heater was blowing and the radio was low, something country he'd never have chosen, and he thought Miller would have laughed. He let her get settled, let her pull off her glove with her teeth and check her phone. He was a large man and he took up most of the driver's side, and in the dark his stillness probably read as something other than what it was, which was simply a person who had stopped knowing how to begin things. He watched her breath cloud and thin. Then he said, "Your brother drives a 94. She went perfectly still. "This is a 91, Silas said. She grabbed the door handle. The lock engaged, that particular sound, a thunk in the cold, and she made a sound, not quite a scream, more like the sound a person makes when their foot finds no stair where a stair should be. He said, "The lock sticks. You have to lift the handle first." Then, before she could move, before the stillness in her turned to something else, "I'm Silas Rook. I worked with Miller. I know who you are." Silence. "He talked about you," Silas said. "He always said, 'My sister Cass, she bites.'" She did not move for a long moment. Then her hand came down from the door to her knee. "You cut your hair," she said finally, as if they'd spoken last week instead of at the funeral 14 months prior, both of them standing in the parking lot of St. Anthony's not knowing what to do with their hands. You look different." She turned back to the windshield. The sodium lights came down on the half-empty lot. The grocery bag crinkled when she shifted. "I thought this was Denny's car," she said. "I know." "I wasn't," she stopped. "I just didn't look." "It's late," Silas said, "and dark, and it's the same color." She glanced at him quick, assessing, the way she'd always looked at things she didn't trust, from the doorway of a kitchen when she was 22 eating cereal out of the box, while Miller said, "This is Silas. We worked together," and Silas had nodded and she had not nodded back. "You're parked in his spot," she said. "I didn't know he had a spot." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He reached across her without asking and lifted the handle, and the door swung open into the cold. She didn't get out. Not right away. The cold came in and neither of them moved, and the radio played something neither of them was listening to, and Silas understood that she had somewhere to go and reasons not to go there, and that the car was warm and dark, and for the moment neither of those things. "He left you the toolbox," she said. "I know." "You know why." "The letter said I would." "But do you?" The radio played. He did not answer because the truth was he wasn't sure. He had theories. He had a memory of a job site in Defiance County, and a joist he hadn't seen, and Miller's hand on his arm hauling him back, and he had always assumed the box was connected to that moment, to a debt. But sitting in the parking lot with the cold coming in, and Cass Duval turned sideways in his passenger seat looking at him like she was deciding something, he thought maybe he didn't know at all. "Not entirely," he said. She looked at him a moment longer, then she got out. He watched her walk to Denny's Cutlass 2 rows over, get in, and pull away. He sat for a while with the engine running. The Christmas Eve traffic moved on the wet road beyond the lot. He put the car in drive. January was iron. Not poetic, just iron. The sky a low gray ceiling, the roads salted and dark. The yards of East Side thinly piled with snow that had come in the first week of the month and hardened to a grayish crust. Silas worked when the weather permitted, and when it didn't he went over bids in his kitchen and called suppliers and drank coffee standing at the window looking at his truck in the drive. He did not go to the house on Greer Street. He understood, without examining the understanding, that Miller's absence had a particular texture at that address, that the objects there were still organized by Miller's preferences, and that Sela's was not built for that kind of contact. He had learned this at 17 in the house where he'd grown up on Colfax, watching his father disappear not dramatically but incrementally, fewer meals, shorter sentences, longer hours in the garage with the Buick that never ran, and understanding that grief in that family was private to the point of being communicable. You did not approach it. You stayed at the edges of rooms. You became competent at practical things and let other people perform the feelings. He was good at practical things. He had a house he owned outright and a truck that ran and a savings account that would cover 8 months with nothing coming in. He had called this, for 20 years, independence. Miller had called it something else. Miller had said, the one time they discussed it, in the parking lot of a bar on a Tuesday in 2015 with the rain coming down, "You're not independent, man. You're just afraid if you're in the room you'll catch something." Sela's had said, "That's not a fair thing to say." Miller had said, "No," and left it there. The toolbox sat in the bed of Sela's truck through January without him touching it, accumulating salt spray, and he did not think about what that meant. February came and the iron cracked slightly. The sky went from gray to the white of old bone, which was not warm but was different, and Denny called about the gutters. Ice Dam had pulled the front section half off the fascia, and Sela's came on a Saturday with his truck and the red toolbox. He had not planned to take the toolbox. He had just grabbed it. Denny met him at the door in his coat, already jangling his keys. "Church thing," he said. He'd be back by noon. He looked at the gutters, looked at Sela's, looked at the gutters again in the practiced way of a man establishing that someone else is now responsible for a problem. "Miller used to do the gutters," Denny said. "Miller couldn't do gutters," Sela's said. "He called me every year." Denny considered that. Something moved in his face, not quite grief, more like revision, a small piece of the story about his brother adjusting itself. He nodded and got in his car and left. Sela's was on the ladder with a handful of gutter screws, the cold coming through his jacket, when the front door opened and Cass came out in a coat that wasn't warm enough and 2 mugs of coffee. She stood at the base of the ladder and held one up without a word. He came down 3 rungs and took it, drank it standing on the ladder. Below him her face was tipped up, squinting against the white sky. "Denny hasn't touched anything in there," she said. "Miller's room, door's been closed since October." Sela's looked at the gutter. "I went in twice," she said. "First time I couldn't stay. Second time I sat on the floor for an hour and took his flannel, washed it. I wear it sometimes." He had nothing for that. He understood she was giving him something, not the information exactly, but the permission inside it. Other people enter these rooms. Other people take what they need and survive. He said, "Good coffee," which was not what he meant but was the only thing he could get out. She looked up at him on the ladder. "The letter," she said. "He said you'd know why he left you the box. Do you? You said not entirely in the car." "There was a job," Sela's said. "Defiance County, a joist rot and I didn't see it. He pulled me back." He looked at the fascia. "I figured the box was him saying, 'You owe me.'" Miller didn't think in terms of owing. "No. So maybe that's not it." He drank the rest of the coffee. She waited at the bottom of the ladder. Neither of them said anything, and the thing they weren't saying sat in the cold air between them, visible as breath. He handed her back the mug. Their fingers overlapped on the ceramic handle briefly, probably accidentally. She went inside. He stayed on the ladder a long time, looking at the gray wood of the fascia, the swollen grain of it, the way it held the shape of every freeze it had ever survived. He came back, the sump pump in March. Then one Saturday in early April he knocked on the frame of the back bedroom window and a towel fell out, and Cass appeared in the doorway in a sweatshirt with the cuffs pulled over her hands. "How long has this been like this?" he asked. "Since October." He looked at her. "October. I have a towel." "Cass, you're not someone people call," she said. Not accusatory, just accounting for something. He wanted to argue with it. He couldn't. He fixed the window in less than 20 minutes. The bedroom was hers. He was aware of it, aware of the book on the nightstand and the Miller flannel on the hook behind the door, the particular smell of a room someone sleeps in. He worked quickly and she stood in the doorway and watched him, and he was aware of her watching, aware that this was different from the ladder and the gutters, the 11 feet of distance between them. He was inside the house now. He was in her room. "He talked about you a lot," she said from the doorway. "You said that in the parking lot." "I know. I'm saying it again because I mean something different by it now." He looked at the window frame, checked the sash. "What do you mean by it now?" She was quiet for a moment. "He used to say you were the best man he knew who didn't know it yet." She pulled a cuff over her knuckles. "I used to think that was Miller being generous. I'm starting to think he was just accurate." He kept his eyes on the frame. He pressed the sash down and it caught and sealed, and the cold that had been coming in through the gap stopped. He stayed for dinner. Denny made spaghetti, burned slightly on the bottom, salted aggressively to compensate, and Silas sat at the kitchen table while Denny stirred. There was a wobble in the table's left leg and he was aware of it, thought about shimming it, filed it. Denny set a place for him without asking, and Silas registered that, the ease of the assumption, and did not know how to hold it. After dinner, Denny stayed at the table. Silas and Cass did the dishes in the wordless way of people who have shared a small space a long time. She washed, he dried, she passed things without looking, and Denny watched them from the table with his coffee. When Silas glanced over, Denny was looking at the dish towel. Not at Silas. At the dish towel, the way Cass passed it and Silas's hand came off the ceramic and took it and set it on the rack, all of it practiced, all of it quiet. Denny looked at this the way he'd looked at the gutters that morning, not with surprise but with something being confirmed. He caught Silas's eye and looked away. He picked up his coffee. He did not say a word. The pipe burst on a Thursday in the third week of April. The thaw had been going for 10 days, the creek behind the property loud and tea-colored, the yard turning to mud, the Ohio earth giving off that specific spring smell of diesel and soil and something underneath that always meant return. Silas was in the basement checking the water heater when he heard it, a sound like a statement, sudden and absolute, and then water. A joint in the copper supply line, frozen too many times. He could see the stress fractures in the metal, the slow cumulative damage of many winters finally given a door to walk through. Water was coming through the subfloor above and sheeting down the basement wall. He moved, found the main shutoff where he'd noted it on his first visit as he always noted it, first thing in any basement, killed the water, stood in the silence that followed, listening to the dripping slow. That silence, he would think about it later, the way the house sounded after the pressure dropped, a long exhalation, something released. Upstairs, Denny saying, "What the?" Then a door, then Cass's voice, short and direct, then the movement of towels. Silas went up. Half an inch standing in the hallway, running toward the bathroom where the floor angled. Cass was in the middle of it in her socks throwing towels from the linen closet. Her socks were immediately soaked. She didn't stop. "I shut the main," Silas said. "The bathroom floor." "I see it." Denny appeared at the end of the hall in his work clothes, already an hour late for his warehouse shift. He stood in the water and looked at his watch and looked at Silas. "Go," Silas said. "I can't just. I've got it, go to work." Denny looked at Cass. She was still moving towels. He looked at Silas. Then he did something Silas hadn't expected. He nodded, not the helpless nod of a man escaping, but a slow, deliberate one, the nod of a man handing something off on purpose. "I know what I'm leaving her with." He pulled on his jacket and went. Silas got the wet vac from the garage. He'd left it there in February after the sump pump backup, had put it in a logical place, a place he'd chosen without asking, and no one had moved it. "Hey," he said. Cass turned. She was holding a stack of towels to her chest, hair coming out of its tie, water to her knees, and she had the look he had seen on job sites on men who have been pouring their competence into a situation and have just found the exact edge of it. "I know what I'm doing isn't working. I cannot stop." He took the towels, gently because she was holding them hard. "Go change your socks," he said. "I'll run the vac." She looked at him. "It's a pipe joint," he said. "I can fix it today. It's not, this is." He ran out of words, which was not unusual, but the words he needed this time were not practical words and he didn't have another kind. He said, "It's just copper." Something in her face changed. Her chin moved. He said, "Go change your socks." She went. He ran the vac for 40 minutes, made a list, drove to the supply house and bought the fitting, came back and fixed the pipe and ran the vac again, and by afternoon the hallway floor was dry enough that he'd pulled the 2 warped boards and laid them flat in the garage with weight on them. He came into the kitchen. She had made soup, actual soup from scratch, the chicken carcass from the freezer. He knew about the carcass because he'd seen it in March when he was fixing the refrigerator seal. The kitchen smelled like something that required hours. He sat without being invited. "The boards might come back," he said. "Depends on drying." "Okay. If they don't, they'll match close enough." "Okay." He looked at his hands. "There's probably another compromised joint in the line running to the kitchen." "How much?" "I'm not charging you." "Sila's." "Miller would have done it." He said it to the table. She turned from the stove a moment. "He wouldn't have, actually. He didn't know copper." She turned back. "He always called you." The soup moved. The creek ran outside. A branch came against the window, withdrew, came again. "I know," Silas said. He was in the garage that Saturday, looking for the basin wrench, when he noticed the toolbox. He had last seen it in the bed of his truck. Now it was on the garage workbench, the sprung top drawer half open as always, tools sorted the way they had always been sorted between 2 men for 11 years, until one of them stopped needing tools. He hadn't put it there. He stood and looked at it. Then he heard Cass in the doorway. "Denny moved it in," she said. "Last week. He didn't say why. I think he thought it was logical." Silas looked at the box. His channelic pliers, the cracked socket wrench he'd never replaced, a jar of Denny's random screws mixed in with the sorted ones. The box was fully on the workbench, fully open, fully here. He picked up his truck keys. He turned to go, then he stopped. "Just leave it," Cass said. She was leaning in the doorway with her arms crossed, not looking at him, looking at the box. "You're only going to bring it back Tuesday." He stood with his keys in his hand. "Wednesday at the latest," she said. He set the keys on the workbench next to the box. He did not pick them back up. He let himself understand the rest of it slowly, the way he let himself understand most true things, sideways, standing next to it and looking at something else. He was driving back to the east side one evening in May, windows down, the air off the field sweet and nasal, and returning, when he let it in. He had gone to the house on Greer Street for Miller. That was true. He had gone because Miller was gone, and the house had a failing sump pump and a gutter pulling away, and a window that leaked cold, and Silas had owed Miller. But he hadn't been going for Miller for some time. He had been going because the kitchen smelled like onions, and the table had a wobble on the left side. He kept meaning to shim, and Cass handed him things without looking and knew how he took his coffee, and had once, without comment, left a porch light on for him when he came back late from a hardware run. He had been going because the alternative was his house, which was clean and quiet and exactly as he left it, always exactly as he left it. And he had understood for 20 years that this was what he wanted, the undisturbed room, the reliable solitude, and was understanding now that it was possible to mistake a cage for a preference if you had been inside it long enough. Miller had known. You're not independent. Had known it years before the rotten joist, before the letter with its upward-climbing handwriting, before the toolbox. Had spent 11 years bringing Silas in through side doors, jobs, Tuesday bars, casual dinners that weren't casual, and had never once said, "I am doing this because you need it," because Miller understood that Silas would have locked the door from outside. He pulled off onto the gravel apron at the edge of a soybean field and sat with the engine running. The sun was going through the tree line, first greens showing in the rows. He had not saved Miller's family. He had been sent back to them to be saved himself, and Miller had known that too, had probably been laughing about it, wherever the dead go to enjoy being right. He asked her in May. He was under the kitchen sink on his back, the channelic in his hand, Miller's or his, it had never mattered, and she was sitting on the floor with her back against the refrigerator eating an apple, handing him things when he asked. "There's another joint I want to look at," he said, from inside the cabinet. "In the basement, but I'd want to come back Saturday." "Okay." He tightened the fitting, and probably most Saturdays after that. She was quiet. "And Thursdays." From inside the cabinet, his voice came back flat and close. "For the plumbing," she said. Not a question, not a concession, the voice of someone deciding whether to say the real thing. "No," he said. He came out from under the sink. She was still on the floor with the apple. She looked at him with the same assessing look from the major parking lot in December, the look that checked what something might cost. "I know what I'm asking," he said. "I'm not sure you do. I'm a lot." "I know. I had a bad year." "I know. Two, actually." "Yeah." She turned the apple in her hands. "I yell sometimes, when things break. Things break a lot around here." "That's not what the corner of her mouth moved briefly. "That's not funny." "It's a little funny." She looked at the window. The afternoon light came straight across the kitchen floor. Her socks had a hole in the left toe that he'd noticed in the hallway flood and thought about since, and not said anything about because it was not the kind of thing you said. "Saturday," she said. "And Thursdays." "And Thursdays," she said. On the 4th of July, Denny's friend Trace brought fireworks, not legal ones, and they stood in the backyard while Trace lit things and ran, and the neighbor's dog lost its mind, and the creek had settled to its summer low, just audible, and the air smelled like sulfur and cut grass and heat coming off the dark earth. At some point, Denny drifted over and stood beside Silas, not close enough to be conspicuous, close enough to be deliberate. "You know," Denny said, watching Trace light something that went sideways and exploded near the fence, "I was in the major parking lot that night." Silas looked at him. "Christmas Eve," Denny said, "I saw her get in your car." He picked up his beer. "I was at the other end of the row. I watched her get in and I thought, well, and then I went back inside for the thing I forgot." He drank. "I was maybe 10 minutes. You didn't say anything." "Didn't seem necessary." He glanced at Silas sideways. "Was it necessary?" Silas looked at the yard, at Cass laughing at something Trace had done, her head thrown back, the light in her face coming and going. "No," he said. "Miller would have thought that was funny," Denny said, "her getting in the wrong car." "He would have," Silas said. "Yeah." Denny nodded and moved away and didn't say anything more about it. Trace sent up the last one, a fountain, nothing spectacular, gold and green sparks rising and falling into the dark yard. Cass came and stood beside Silas, and he was aware of her elbow against his arm and the cold beer in his hand, and the way she tilted her head back to watch, her face open and lit. She reached down and took his hand. She didn't look at him, kept watching the fountain sputter out, the last sparks falling into the grass. He held on. The yard went dark. Nobody moved for a moment. The creek ran somewhere past the fence, low and continuous, and the dog next door had finally gone quiet, and the smell of the cordite was thinning in the warm July air. He held on. The toolbox was in the garage with the drawer that wouldn't close and Denny's screws mixed in with theirs, and the keys Sila's had set down on the workbench 2 months ago and not picked back up. It sat on the bench in the dark with the sprung drawer open, the way it always had been, the way he suspected it always would be. Kaz didn't let go. The last spark went out,